Hello, good morning, and thank you for joining us on day 15 of 16 days of activism, the penultimate day of an international campaign which aims to raise awareness and galvanise support for eliminating violence against women and girls. Some quick housekeeping. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always good to know who's in the room. The webinar is recorded. You would have just had a notification advising that. We're delighted to be joined by the amazing Rob Chalk, who is interpreting the webinar for us. So feel free to pin him. We're going to have a very short break after Alana's presentation, but it's only right to kick off today with some feminist inspiration. So, in the words of the staunch Black British feminist Marie Larousseau, if we are to end violence against women and girls and create a truly equal world, we need to start to create systemic shifts across social norms. This is not just about transforming belief systems and behaviours in terms of gender. It also means addressing other norms, for example, around ethnicity, class and disability, all of which contribute to holding other repressive systems in place. And for me, this quote really captures our journey at AVA, our mission as fierce feminists fighting to see a world without gender-based violence, but also our journey to becoming an anti-racist and intersectional organisation. So my name is Michaela, and I'm super excited to lead Healthy London, Healthy Relationships, a pioneering prevention partnership which is funded by London councils, working alongside the awesome Latin American Women's Rights Service, the Women and Girls Network, Jewish Women's Aid, ICRO, Forward and Imache. So just going to give you some background, Healthy London, Healthy Relationships in context. It comes at a time when the Domestic Abuse Act recognises children and young people as victims in their own right, when religious and sex education has become mandatory, but at the same time, teachers are reporting a lack of confidence to implement this curriculum. Now, this can be compounded further by data from Safe Lives, who highlights how at least 1 in every child will be living in a domestically abusive household by the time they start school. And this presents a compelling case for prevention work in schools. So just putting these statistics in context, we know that violence against women and girls is a hidden crime and underreported, which means that these figures could actually be greater. There is a lack of disaggregated data, which means it's difficult to know just, who these children are. And, this is problematic because it results in a one-size-fits-all approach. We know children are not a homogenous group, and that specificities matter. Specificities such as intersecting social identities shape lived experience. Now, this couldn't be more pertinent in a post-pandemic society, as childhood is ever-changing. For anyone less familiar, Healthy London, Healthy Relationships aims to prevent violence against women and girls by embedding a whole school approach to strengthen schools' responses to tackle gender-based violence. And you'll see I'm doing a great job with the tech today, multitasking, so apologies in advance. I'm, delighted to be joined by 3 guest speakers to address the aims of today's webinar. We will introduce the key principles of a whole school approach to help raise awareness about why a whole school approach is needed to promote healthy relationships. And we'll explore what a whole school approach looks like in practice. I'm really interested to know your thoughts on a whole school approach before we start. So if you can, in the chat, just take a few moments to put some words, that come to mind when you hear a whole school approach. Hello, Sinam. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see one of our partners on the call from Imache. I'll just give you a few minutes to put your thoughts in the chat if anyone is interested in sharing their thoughts on a whole school approach. And it's okay, it's okay if nothing comes to mind. I guess that's why you're here, curiosity. Thank you very much. We've got a few things coming through. So, Clara, all staff being confident in challenging gender stereotypes. Absolutely. And Alana talking about working collaboratively, teachers and pupils. Again, links back to today's webinar, an introduction to a whole school approach and the role of community. Thank you, Rhiannon. Things that affect culture and values of school, not just the curriculum. Absolutely. And I thank you for taking the time to share those thoughts with me. So, delving a little bit deeper, what is a whole school approach? So a whole school approach is an evidence-based model that consists of 6 activities, whereby children, young people, parents, carers, adults and teachers all come together to learn about the building blocks of a healthy relationship. And our evidence tells us that by learning about the different components of a healthy relationship, we can increase confidence to challenge those belief systems that reinforce gender inequality, as we've just heard in the chat. And that increased confidence can lead us to take action to disrupt those gender stereotypes, which again can ignite a cultural change. I know in some of the conversations that I had that a whole school approach can seem quite a daunting concept, but it's not meant to be. So, pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Let's, simplify a whole school approach by framing it as a jigsaw puzzle and unpack what it means. So each piece represents an activity that takes place around a school or a youth setting. And these activities are, in fact, the key principles. So if we start with learning, learning is about, understanding the intersectional nature of violence against women and girls to help challenge gender inequality and build respect for relationships. When we think about safeguarding, this is about increasing capacity to support people who are experiencing different forms of violence against women and girls. And that can increase confidence to identify and respond to abuse. When we think about campaigning, this is about taking action to stop violence against women and girls. And it could be about raising awareness on a particular issue that you're seeing in schools, such as girls feeling sexualized. When we think about participating, this is about creating opportunities for children, young people, staff and parents and carers to increase their understanding about violence against women and girls. Institutionalizing, again, the language, the jargon, simplifying this. In its simplest form, it's about igniting a cultural shift deep within the organisation that engulfs the wider community. So we're thinking about your policies and your procedures, threads that run throughout the setting, that infiltrates the atmosphere, the curriculum and the school culture. Localising is about establishing and strengthening your links with specialist providers of gender-based violence and bringing in that additional resource and expertise to help build capacity and confidence. So in its simplest form, a whole school approach is about bringing everyone together within the ecosystem. Children, young people, parents, carers, teachers, support staff, governors, bringing them all on the journey as one community to learn about healthy relationships. And with an increased confidence can take action to challenge and disrupt those attitudes that contribute to gender-based violence. And as the lovely Susie Feltham said to me the other day, It's about planting a seed of change, which has the potential to translate into a collective commitment amongst everyone within the ecosystem to be agents of change and prevention pioneers. And on that note, I'm really delighted to introduce our first speaker, Zoe Palmer from Girl Guiding. Zoe is the Externals Affairs Manager. She leads the organisation's policy and influencing work to raise the profile of girls' voices throughout research, working with their youth panel advocates. Her team ensures that girls' and young women's experiences are heard at the highest level of decision making to create positive change. Zoe will talk about their research and advocacy work on the issue of sexual harassment in school. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Michaela. It's so nice to be invited to be able to join you today, so thank you. And I should say that our advocates, our youth panel who lead our advocacy work, were invited, but unfortunately nobody was able to join us this morning. So I'm more of a conduit, kind of presenting the work that they do as young women addressing the issue of sexual harassment in schools. And all of our research and our campaigning work is led by them. So I'm sort of here to present their work, if you like. I'm just going to share my screen and my presentation. Okay, hope you can see that okay. So Girl Guiding, we're the leading charity for girls and young women across the UK. We provide weekly unit meetings for girls from aged 4 to 18. They're rainbows, brownies, guides and rangers. We have 25,000 units that meet every single week in all parts of the country, doing our programme of activities, which is a huge cross range of fun and engaging ways that girls can have fun, develop their skills and make friends. And we pride ourselves on being a safe and welcoming space for all girls, where they can be themselves and build their confidence and get the opportunity to try lots of things that they otherwise might not get to. So Girl Guiding started to do work around sexual harassment in schools in 2014. We run an annual piece of research called the Girls Attitude Survey. Next year will be our 15th year of doing this research, with the aim to gather the views, experiences and voices of girls, both inside and outside of Girl Guiding. So it's representative of all girls across the country. And in 2014, when we asked about experiences of sexual harassment in schools, we found that just under 60% said they had experienced some form of sexual harassment. And the way in which we asked that was to ask specific questions about whether they had been on the receiving end of sexist kind of jokes, unwanted touching. So kind of trying to break it down so that girls could understand the question and what that might include. Following that, our advocate panel, our young women, we have 20 advocates who are between the ages of 14 and 21. At the time, they decided that they wanted to launch a campaign given the scale and the issue of sexual harassment in schools. And following a consultation with our wider membership, it was agreed that that would be a really important campaign for Girl Guiding to work on. As part of their campaign launch, they were calling for new guidance for schools and for sex and relationships education to become statutory subjects, so that all children and young people would be learning about healthy relationships, about consent, and trying to change behaviours and attitudes that they hoped would then tackle the kind of wide-scale harassment within schools. As part of that campaign, they met with Maria Miller, who was the chair of the Women and Equalities Committee at the time, and they were doing an inquiry into this issue. Their report also showed the huge scale and called on the government to act further. The advocates were also involved in working with the Department for Education on guidance and sharing their views and research to help schools kind of understand a bit more about what could be done. And there was guidance at the time published around sexual harassment and trying to support schools to look at that as an issue specifically. And in 2017, they were incredibly kind of delighted and celebrated the fact that the government announced that RSE would become a statutory subject in schools in England. And at the time, again, we were involved in developing the guidance for schools around what a curriculum for health and relationships and sex education could look like and what it should include. And girls felt particularly strongly that that needed to include talking about healthy relationships, talking about consent and respect, but also talking about and understanding gender stereotypes and sexism and how gender inequality creates a culture in which sexual harassment can thrive. But we all know that since then there was a pandemic and schools were given a bit of leeway around embedding relationships in sex education. But given that it's been another year since then, we did some further research in 2021, partly also in response that advocates were really keen to see kind of where things were at, whether things had got better. But actually our research found that more girls were experiencing sexual harassment in schools. Partly that increase is related to increase in online sexual harassment that girls receive as well. And in 2021, as I'm sure you'll all know, there was a lot more kind of public conversations around sexual harassment, and girls felt like this was a really crucial moment where people were sort of maybe understanding how much this issue was affecting girls. A lot of conversations around girls and women's safety, and also the Everyone's Invited website, where girls in particular, but all children, young people, were just posting their testimonies and stories about their experiences, and it really showed the kind of culture and nature of normalized sexual harassment, as did the Ofsted inquiry in 2021, looking into this issue as well. So it felt like a really pivotal moment to be saying, actually, you know, this is worse than ever, and we know it's there, and so what are we going to do about it? And this year, our research showed that just over a third of children and young people in secondary school had learnt about consent. So despite RSE now being a statutory subject in England and actually now in Wales, a third had learnt about consent, and our advocates felt like this was just not good enough. And fair enough, it's taking time for schools to be able to start embedding this new curriculum. But this is kind of urgent, and whilst we're waiting, girls aren't safe. So last month, our advocates wrote an open letter to the Secretary of State for Education, and very kindly from a number of organisations, including AVA, we were supported with this letter, which made them kind of really happy to be able to collaborate with a number of expert organisations in this area, calling on the government to really prioritise RSE and it being embedded. And rather than 36% learning about consent, that should be 100%. That schools should get guidance, further guidance around tackling sexual harassment, that teachers needed more support and more training so that they feel confident and skilled to be able to deliver this subject. And part of our cause, and what's really crucial for girls, is about schools being able to take a whole schools approach, which for them means that yes, RSE is a really crucial part of that. And that's about young people kind of being able to understand and learn about healthy relationships and consent, but also that needs to fit in a wider commitment by schools and school leaders to creating a safe space for all young people to be able to learn and thrive in. And they also want young people to be involved in co-creating a curriculum around RSE that meets their needs. So depending potentially on where you are in the country, or depending on your experiences, actually, how can young people be part of the development of that curriculum so that it is effective and it does work, and that there's quality RSE in that school? In terms of then what a whole school approach might mean for girls and young women, as I mentioned, it's about creating a safe and inclusive culture within the school. But really crucially, how can sexual harassment in schools be prevented in the first place? We know that RSE can play a really crucial role in changing attitudes and behaviours, that needs to also be an inclusive curriculum. Really kind of crucial for girls was that it was inclusive for all young people, and that therefore it would really help to address and support them to understand how this could apply to them, whether that was around LGBTQ plus issues, children with special educational needs, and also girls of colour's experience where race and gender intersect around particular experiences of sexual harassment that needed to be addressed and acknowledged and recognised. But also, girls felt that sexual harassment thrives because of sexist attitudes, gender stereotypes around what behaviours are kind of excused or acceptable around being a girl or being a boy. So this year we found that 66% of girls had seen or experienced sexism in their school, and that is an increase from when we last asked that in 2018. A fifth of girls say that gender stereotypes hold them back at school. So not only is there kind of this culture of gender stereotypes that can kind of feed into normalized sexual harassment, but actually it holds them back in other ways. It holds them back in terms of the subject choices they might get or the opportunities that they might be able to have at school and in their education. 44% said they'd been patronized or made to feel stupid because of their gender, because they are a girl. And 56% wanted schools to do more to tackle gender stereotypes. And some research we did a few years ago also looked at the way in which girls weren't learning about women within different subjects within the curriculum. So a third said they'd learned about women in either politics, music, or science, which again is kind of telling a story about the role of women and their value and their contributions, which for us is really important in terms of thinking about creating an equal and safe world for girls to grow up in, and for all young people. So that's a bit of an overview of our work on this area, on this issue, something we'll continue to support girls to advocate on and have their voices heard at the highest level. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I really enjoyed you sharing what your advocates have been up to, and yeah, sexist attitudes creating fertile ground for sexual harassment to thrive, and how problematic that is, as we said, in this post-pandemic society. But there is a solution. We have an evidence-based model to create that safe and inclusive space for girls and young people to thrive. Thank you for adding another layer to today's webinar. I'm delighted to hand over to our next speaker, Ilana. I'm going to attempt to reshare my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my slides. Okay, just going to introduce Ilana. So Ilana is one of our amazing partners on our Healthy London Healthy Relationships program from Jewish Women's Aid. She is their school manager, and she's a qualified teacher with over 20 years experience in the classroom working with young people in youth settings. Ilana has co-developed a brand new program for Jewish Women's Aid's consent, education and schools sexual violence prevention program, and is really excited to embark on a whole school approach. So Ilana will illustrate how a whole school approach can support schools to build a culture of consent within their school communities. Over to you, Ilana.
Thank you so much, Michaela, and thank you to Zoe. That was so interesting. The findings that you had, I mean, I think many people here in this room probably aren't surprised by some of those, but certainly it can help feed into the work that we're doing. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see what I want to share. Have a new slideshow, sorry. Okay, is that good for everyone? I hope so. Okay, so I wanted to share with you, or I've been asked, thank you so much, Michaela, for asking me to share some of the work that we have already started doing at Jewish Women's Aid, which is part of an outreach and prevention department within our organisation, where for my work, we're looking at developing a whole school approach model to tackle sexual violence for sexual violence prevention and consent education. So just to sort of explain a little bit about who we are and what we do. So we're the only specialist, Jewish Women's Aid is the only specialist organisation in the UK supporting Jewish women and children affected by domestic abuse and sexual violence. So we support and empower women and girls who've experienced domestic violence and sexual violence in their intimate relationships. We also increase awareness and education and understanding in order to prevent violence against women and girls within the Jewish community. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the work that we're doing and what we've started to do. But just to sort of say, we provide client-centered support for women and children. We have therapists, we have counsellors, we have children's therapists who can support the girls that come to our service. So we support around 700 women and 200 children each year. And within our outreach programs, we reach around just over 4,000 young people. I joined the organisation probably about 3.5 years ago, and the work that we were doing in schools was all about being invited in for a little bit of their PSHE to raise awareness about healthy relationships. So perhaps we did a lesson about what is healthy relationships, what's consent, and trying to encourage young people to try and spot signs of unhealthy and abusive behaviours. We'd pop into schools, we'd pop out of schools. We were at a whim of whether schools would invite us back in to deliver this work. And when I came in, I was like, this is good, it's okay. And the education we're doing is okay, but I don't know these kids, they don't know me, and I'll walk out the door an hour later. How can we do more? And how can we have a bigger and better impact with these young people? And so for a while now, we've been thinking, not just because Ofsted says so, not just because it's kind of like become this buzzword, but we know we had to, from a good couple of years now, develop a more of a whole school approach. And at the time we thought we just need to have more of a holistic way of looking at this work, at prevention. If we really want to be involved in prevention education, if we want to change harmful ideas and attitudes, if we want to really have a bigger impact in young people's lives and their own teenage relationships, rather than just raise awareness for at some point down the line in the future, but we want to help them right here, right now, we're going to have to do a little bit more than popping in and out and giving a little bit of sporadic education. We need parents involved with this work. We need teachers to have a greater confidence to open, there's some of the more challenging conversations around consent, around sexual violence. Because if we don't, and we're not going to be able to change a culture. The work that I do, it will only go so far. And it used to be just about awareness raising about our charity, just to let young people know we exist and we are a support service within our community. Actually, we want to do more. So we believe that we want to embed, we want to create a culture of consent across a whole school community. So that's equipping, giving them the tools, the senior leaders, governors, teachers, parents, students with the knowledge and skills to make a difference. And not only do we want them to have a greater understanding, not only do we want them to have the tools to help this work, but we want to empower them to want to make that change. And I have these conversations internally all the time. We are a feminist organization that takes a feminist intersectional approach. How do we get our schools to make this a priority, to see the same sort of things that we're seeing? Yeah, come and deliver. We're happy to have you in to have consent education, healthy relationships education. Do they yet realize that we're talking about gender-based violence? I don't know if we're there yet. So that's a big barrier that we need to break down. So let me show you a little bit more about what we mean. The work that we do involves knowledge, skills, and empowerment. And the work that we've started to do is to look at students. How can we provide students with a greater knowledge and awareness of domestic abuse, sexual violence, and consent? How can we provide a greater knowledge for teachers, so to support them with their consent education? And it's not just the teachers who are teaching the PSHE. We want to help them because they're the ones who are delivering this work day in and day out. But we would also want to train senior leaders. We want to train, and in fact, Michaela, you've got something great on your website about all teachers who are teaching other subjects. How can they bring this work and integrate it into science, into maths, into history, into PE? That would be an amazing piece of work. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a whole school approach. It is every opportunity we have to make a difference with these young people, we want to harness that. And then parents. I once had a teacher say to me, lovely, you're trying to get children to be nice to each other. You've got an hour to do it. And then they go spend 20 hours at home on their social media, and then their parents are telling them something different. How can we involve parents with this work? They have a huge role to play. How can we provide them with that knowledge and confidence to be able to help and support this? And then the skills. So we want to provide young people with skills to call out that unwanted behavior, call out those sexist jokes, those harmful gender stereotypes, which are harmful to both boys, to girls, to everybody. Also the teachers. We've seen, there's been so many reports now through Ofsted, through UK Feminista a number of years ago. Many people have said for a while that things go unchecked. And me being a teacher for a number of years, I don't think teachers are knowingly want to allow sexual harassment to take place. I feel that they just don't have the confidence. They don't necessarily know what to do. Turn a blind eye, because if I start addressing that, I'm opening a whole can of worms and I don't know how to deal with it. So how can we provide teachers with the confidence to call out these unwanted behaviours so that they become less normalised? And we have to help them understand where their work fits into the bigger picture. So every time they are calling this stuff out, they are contributing to dismantling that culture that we know leads into something more serious. And the same with the parents. I always give the example of, I jog with a friend and we were jogging down the street, we get wolf whistled, and I tell my friend, oh, this is the work that I do, that's so cool, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And she looked at me so perplexed. She was like, really? Like really, are you not just being oversensitive? Actually, we've got a big we've got a lot of work to do to break down the ingrained attitudes of parents who might think, oh, we're just being oversensitive, or are we just like nitpicking? How can we bring them on board as well? And we want to empower. And I think that for me is one of the biggest impacts that we could have with a whole school approach, moving away from awareness raising and skills-based and knowledge-based to really, how can we empower young people to make a change, to make a difference? And it starts off small, making a difference within their friend groups, within their peers, and then within their wider school community, and how that has a ripple effect. And that's how we can break down a culture. And getting everybody in a school community on board with that, for me, would be a huge success. That's when someone said to me, what does success look like? If we can have young people and staff and every stakeholder within that school feeling empowered to want to make a change and knowing the channels to do that, then I feel like our work is definitely part of the way to succeeding. Okay, so just some guiding principles, which I share with teachers. We've now started to do a lot more teacher training. I want them to have some principles to this kind of education. So I want them to be able to make space for difficult conversations, to be able to respond in a non-judgmental way. So we go in, teach a lesson about consent. A kid may ask something a little bit inappropriate or a little bit rude. Teacher lays into them, tells them off, saying how rude and inappropriate they are, shuts them down. I don't want to shut any kid down. I want to be able to create a classroom that allows difficult conversations to take place. Of course, we want them to be respectful conversations, but how can we, instead of shutting out that disruptive kid or that kid who struggles to access whatever it is that we're trying to deliver, we need to bring them into the conversation. Take an intersectional feminist approach, which we've spoken about before. Avoiding conversations that lead to victim blaming. How can we shift that focus that, you know, we're talking about consent and, well, she didn't say no, so, you know, well, actually, how can we shift that blame, shift that focus around safety and moving away from the survivor that is the one who has to make the choices. Avoid fear-based education. I think that how do we get this work embedded within a school without scaring kids? Because actually statistics say at university are scary. Sexual harassment in the workplace, if they understood really what's going on, it's scary. How can we try to deliver this work without scaring kids? And working in partnership with the schools. What we do within Jewish Women's Aid is that we respect the religious ethos or the cultural ethos within the school, and we tailor make our work to make it fit within that school community. I wouldn't want anyone, we want to be able to work with any school, because we really need to be changing the culture and attitudes of all the people that we work with, but really working with, like, we want to make our work really bespoke. Okay, so I wanted to share some of the work that we've started to do already this academic year, which has been fantastic. Normally in September, I meet with most of our partner schools that we work with, say, right, how are we going to work together this year? And I'm trying to explain this whole school approach. And originally I thought I would choose one of my schools to pilot this work, and I would really embed it with that one particular school. However, what happens then when I go to another school and I'm like, well, I don't want to just pop in anymore to you or you or you or you. I want to try and think holistically with all the schools that we work with. So actually it's working a bit differently to what I thought it would. And we're doing pockets of this approach with everyone, basically. We're trying to. So we've done a number of teacher training workshops already. We've started with some year leads. So the school have given to us their heads of year and pastoral leads, which has been amazing. And it's a really insightful, because I must not presume they know anything. I must not presume that they know or understand the values that you bring to this work. So some of the questions, things like, well, if you're both drunk, does it matter? And I have one teacher going, well, yeah, it doesn't really matter. And I'm like, okay. And they're coming from an angle of, I know what I did when I was a kid, and actually allowing teachers to really understand some of the more complexities. They're going to be able to create a better PSHE and RSC curriculum for their students. So we started working with teachers, but actually 2 schools have now provided us with a whole staff training that we've got booked in for the spring term. And we've said we want teaching assistants. I want the reception staff. I want anyone that you can give to me, because I want to try and empower the whole school community to break down this culture. Because so much of this stuff is taking place in the corridors, in the playground, in the lunch hall. How can we bring everybody on board? Parents. Last week, I gave a parent workshop. Again, I feel like parents, many of us don't know what we don't know. So those people who turned up, they're probably already halfway there to being interested in how they can promote healthy, respectful relationships and open those conversations around consent with their children. But we're starting to chip it away and share what we're sharing with the students so that they can have that same common language and share that when they're at home. And peer leadership, something that I know Michaela mentioned with the whole school approach model, is peer education is so important. It's all very well and good. We talk as adults to young people about relationships, but we ain't really got a clue what's going on in their heads. But how about their peers do? So we are starting, hopefully in the spring term, with a year 12 program to empower them with the knowledge and skills to support this work and go to work with the younger kids in the school. And there'll be some sort of collaboration there. So maybe when we next meet, or if there's another opportunity, we can share with you how that's going. But I just wanted to say some of the challenges that anyone who's doing this work, it's really not easy. How can we promote that inclusive classroom where we allow students to ask those challenging questions? How can we bring boys into this conversation without them feeling that they're being alienated or attacked? And how can we break down that fear? I think there's a genuine fear, and it mainly comes from my parents, friends of mine who have sons, that they are worried that their kids are going to be falsely accused. They are worried that their boys don't know how to talk to girls, because we have given, which is an amazing shift, many young girls the permission to call something out when they're not happy with, when that is sexual harassment, when that is unwanted behaviors. We are providing them with the language and the tools to do that. How can we then, where do we go from there? Because a lot of boys, there seems to be, we haven't brought the education along with it enough. So we need to do a lot of work there. Most of the people I have contact with in schools are PSHE leads. How can we bring this work from a senior level downwards? If they can make this work a priority, it will trickle down to the rest of the school. And then just one other thing, just to sort of say, how can we, with all the good intentions, if we can work with schools who are desperate for this work to take place, but actually teachers are really time poor. How can they embed this work? How can we make it easy for them to embed this work when there just isn't loads of time? They don't have lots of time in their curriculum. They don't have lots of inset time. It's really difficult. So I just wanted to add in that it's a long process, this cultural change. It's going to take some time. And I feel that if our education start with ourselves, as in we start with the students and we want to educate them, then this can help promote healthy relationships and dismantle rape culture, and it will help their wider community. We're trying to show young people that this work can have a ripple effect. So if they can change themselves, it can make a difference within their peer group, within the wider community, and then within the wider society. If I have a minute, Michaela, maybe tell me if I do. I just, and if not, don't worry, I can stop. Just some resources that we use.
Yes.
Are we out of time?
Go for it. Go for it.
Don't worry. These are just some of the resources that we use. We want to teach consent within a context, so it's relevant to them, what is impacting their understanding of what healthy looks like. If they're watching porn, they're watching films and the social media, they're swiping and scrolling for hours, how are they going to know what healthy looks like? We look at power dynamics and we show how that leads to abusive relationships with power imbalances. We talk about consent, we give them legal definitions. We also give them this really nice tool to remember FRIES, and we use this to work through what consent is. And then impacts as well. Just something I didn't say, that we're the contact leads for these following boroughs. So if you know anyone who's in that borough and wanted some resources of this work or some ideas or advice of how to embed this work in their schools, then please do contact us, because yes, we work within our Jewish community, but we have this wider role within our partnership with AVA. Sorry, it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that was okay and useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilana, as always, absolutely informative. And I'm sure that, our attendees got so much out of that. I love, as you say, planting the seed of change, role modeling to really challenge those ingrained attitudes, that have become normalized. And again, really highlighting the role of community. We're going to take a very quick 5-minute break. So if you can come back at 10:52, we will have our final speaker. Thank you very much. Thank you for continuing to stay with us as we go into the final part of our webinar. I'm delighted to introduce another partner, Zuzi. Zuzi is from the Women and Girls Network.
Hi.
Hello, Zuzi.
Hi.
I'm going to set the scene for you, Zuzi.
Please do.
Zuzi is the gender-based violence prevention worker from the Women and Girls Network. She is also an activist and a therapist and a part-time and part of the Young Women's team. The core of her work is creating spaces of connection, learning and growth to facilitate the healing of gender-based violence to promote social change. Her favourite part of the work is witnessing young women and young non-binary people turn in isolation and struggle into solidarity and friendship. So today Zuzi will talk to us about a workshop that she's recently delivered to a group of young people around campaigning and sexual harassment, and pull out some key themes. Delighted to hand over to you, Zuzi.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me along, Michaela. So as Michaela said, I'm here to talk about the work I've been doing as part of Healthy Relationships, but also tying in work that we've been doing as a team over the last 6 years around whole school approach. So for context, Women and Girls Network, where I come from, is an intersectional feminist organisation, and our mission is to prevent gender-based violence, as well as support the recovery of survivors and communities. So we've been providing advocacy, counselling and group work for 35 years now. The Young Women's team, we've been going for 6. And within that, we provide support to young women and young people, including young non-binary people that have experienced any kind of gender-based violence. And we also have a prevention team, which is where I come from. So we're a trans inclusive service, which is something we're very proud of. We work with all young women, including trans young women and young non-binary people. So this is our area of expertise, but we also do some work with young men where appropriate and within our skill set. So we have a structural as well as interpersonal analysis of gender-based violence. So our work's quite broad. So I run everything from therapeutic group work with small groups of survivors to social justice workshops with classes, sometimes year groups. As Michaela mentioned, we're all about planting seeds, creating long-term change. As Ilana was saying as well, it was a very long-term process. So for us, it's about igniting that thought process in the young person's mind of like reflection, of questioning things, of feeling some sense of power to make change. So we create spaces for young people to come together, to connect to themselves and each other. That's a really important part of our work, is creating community. And creating spaces for marginalised young people. So one of our current projects, Fruit Loops, as named by the young people, is a social space for LGBTQIA young people to come together to make friends, celebrate queer joy and love, and also acknowledge the struggles and challenges of being young and queer today. Okay, now I'm going to speak a little bit about a workshop I ran recently. So I delivered a workshop on sexual harassment campaigning. It was a mixed group of year 9s, around 25 to 30 of them. So this part of the work is important for us because it's not just about what the problem is, it's also about what the solutions are, and equipping young people with the tools that they need to make change within their school communities, whilst acknowledging that ultimately the power to make that change also lies with those in positions of power, the teaching staff, boards of governors, but that within that they have power to make choices over their own lives and their communities and their friendship groups. So it was an interactive workshop. We supported young people to look at what their key messages are. So what are the specific issues that they're facing in school in relation to sexual harassment? So rather than what they're hearing elsewhere, what are they feeling and experiencing? What are they noticing is the impact on themselves as young women and on the school culture more broadly? So you'll notice I'm going to speak in quite gendered terms, young men and young women. I don't know if there were young people in the group who identified as non-binary, so I'm going to use that language, but acknowledge that young and binary people are also experiencing sexual harassment in schools. So what is the impact on young women, and what is the impact on the school culture, and what do they want to see change? And we then supported them to come up with a strategy. So how are they going to change this? And we looked at lots of different tools and tactics for change. So online, social and creative tactics, as well as the use of direct action. And we also talked about escalation. So how you plan your campaign, what steps you take if your demands aren't met, what do you do next? It was quickly apparent, which is often the case, that there was a really clear gender divide in the class in terms of how young people were responding to the workshop. So young women were really engaged and passionate in their small groups. They were having really fruitful conversations and clearly feeling really strongly about the issue, but they were very quiet in the large group, which is again often what we notice, is that where there is a split, young men tend to dominate and young women are intimidated to speak out about what they're experiencing. There was a mix of attitudes amongst the young men, like some were distracted, there was some apathy, and then there were some who were being intentionally disruptive, which I'll speak a bit more about in a bit in terms of what was coming up for them. Young women, so what did they share with us? So in terms of the issues, they spoke about sexual assault being frequent, experiencing other forms of unwanted touching, as well as intrusions around comments on their appearance, their body and their clothes. They talked about what the impact is of this. So they spoke about feeling insecure in their bodies, feeling self-conscious, and this being a real distraction then from their work, really struggling to focus, feeling tired. And the one that often I feel makes me feel saddest was feeling helpless. So as a result of the lack of response from staff, so little being done to hold young men accountable and to change the culture, a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness that nothing will change. So then we looked at strategy, so what they can do to make change within schools, and these were the ideas that they came up with. So they spoke about forming a regular meeting space for young people to come together and share their experiences, to support each other, to kind of reduce this feeling of feeling alone, to create the sense of connection that they're not the only ones struggling with this. And then from that to plan their demands and strategize around how they wanted to make change in school. They spoke about writing a letter to the senior leadership team and head teachers and governors that detailed their concerns and experiences and then the change that they wanted to see. And then their escalation tactic was if they didn't see this change, then they would have a protest outside of school. Majority of that was coming from the young women in terms of conversations that were had in terms of the young men in the smaller groups. What we noticed, and this is something that we often see, is that there was a small group who were intentionally trying to disrupt the workshop. And what the young women told us after they were removed from the room was that they're the ones who have been enacting these harmful behaviours. And so what we see is that these workshops, particularly where you're just coming in, and just as Alana said, where you don't have that relationship with the young people, it can be too confronting and exposing for them, and then they attempt to derail the workshop. We also saw denial that it was an issue and a lack of awareness that it was happening. And so what we're seeing here is the impact of normalisation. So when sexual harassment, as we know it is normalised in society and in the school culture, there can be a lack of understanding of the harmful nature. I think another issue we're seeing is that young men, they witness this behaviour in their peers, even if they're not enacting it, and there's a lot of fear around challenging it. They don't necessarily have the tools to challenge it, and it can be really intimidating in any institution to call out this behaviour. But this is going to be compounded if the young men don't feel like they have the support of the teachers, for example, if they do call it out, like who's going to back them up, basically. And so for us, the key learning from this is, I mean, very much resonates with what we're saying today, that the groundwork needs to be done, and that this is why a whole school approach is so important. One-off workshops can really get to the core of the issue and create the safety that's needed for young people to address these issues. So for young men to actively participate in this kind of change, they need safe spaces to explore and confront masculinity and its relationship to dominance and harm. So what we need to see, and the approach that we usually take, is having psychoeducational workshops on what sexual harassment is. So looking at its root causes and its impact on young women and on young trans people and the school culture, and also really importantly, how this interacts with racism and homophobia. Doing this in separate groups so that young men have spaces to understand masculinity and specifically understand toxic masculinity, how this looks and feels, how it harms them, as well as young women and young trans people. They need those safe, supportive spaces that allow them to address this and empower them with confidence and tools to call out their peers. If they feel defensive, it's likely that they will shut down, as we saw in the workshop, or try to disrupt, which is what we also saw. And if young women are present, they will likely dominate, which again is a theme we often see. And then young women need these separate spaces in order to be able to speak freely about what their experiences are and what they need and what change they want to see. But I think the really key thing is that what we then need to see is bringing those spaces together. So once those conversations have happened separately, that we create spaces where young people of all genders can come together to share their learning and share their experiences once they feel listened to and acknowledged rather than problematized. And this is something that young women consistently tell us, is they want to have spaces with young men where they can tell them what their experience is, but they need there to be a level of openness and willingness from the young men to listen. And we find the best way of doing that is if the young men also have their own spaces. And so once they've done this and they come back together, they're much more equipped to strategize together about how they want and need to address sexual harassment in schools. So that's a little bit feedback from the workshop that we recently ran. I also wanted to share just a little success story because as people have mentioned, this work can be really challenging in terms of making lasting change. And often you'll go into a school and you leave and you don't have a sense of kind of what happens next. But some of our schools we keep in contact with, and one of them we delivered a whole school approach in, I think, over 2020 to 2021. And we had a group of young women who were really engaged in the group work, really inspired by it. It clearly really met a need that they had. And so they were inspired to set up their own space. So they set up their own trans-inclusive young women only space that they called Fem Space. And the structure of it was that sixth formers set it up. And they then wanted to do like an intergenerational learning and support space with the younger girls. So they had, I think, year 8, year 9, year 10s coming. After, I think, only a few weeks of it being set up, they started to experience quite a lot of backlash from sixth form young men in sixth form. They're experiencing harassment. And again, this like trying to disrupt the work they were doing. But what was really great was that the staff were really supportive of the young women. They were really vocal. That young women had the right to this space, that this space was important, that the young men needed to support it. And what they did was invited me back in, which was really great and really like beautiful experience for me to come back in and see the great work that they were doing. And that meant that I could provide them with support in order to continue what they're doing. When I got there, they were all really ready to quit. But we had a really great session where we focused on relationship building and individual and group self-esteem. And actually what that did was give them an opportunity, particularly the older ones who were feeling like they should stop it because they were worried about the impact on the younger women, gave them an opportunity to see the real impact that the group has had on the younger women in terms of their well-being. So I just wanted to share a couple of quotes that they said, some things they said in the group about this Fem Space that the older young women had set up. So I feel safer in school now knowing that I've got support here. This group makes me want to come to school. The older girls feel like my big sisters. And I now know that things that were happening to me before aren't okay. Now I tell the boys to stop when I don't like what they're doing. And then one of the sixth formers said, I feel like we're making lasting change here, and this group will keep going for a really long time. There we go. Thank you for listening. If anyone would like my contact details, please just ask Michaela. Happy to answer questions in the Q&A. And if you want any kind of follow-up support or interested in the services that we have, please do get into contact.
Thank you so much, Susie. Just all the layers, how all the layers are being woven together, as you've heard how we set the scene, and we heard from Zoe at Girl Guiding, and Alana and Susie, how peer support, the role of community to feel empowered, and how we have a responsibility to really lead by example as well. We have a lot of eyes on us, children and young people looking to us to really lead the way. I'm conscious of time. The webinar's due to finish at 15:15. I can't see any questions in the Q&A, but I will invite you, if you have got a question, to put that in the chat. Equally, we can take questions after the webinar. If you reflect on what you've heard today, you're interested to find out more, our contact details, will be included in the PowerPoint. Always happy to continue the conversation. I'll just give a moment. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Matt, for your question. I will invite all the panelists to turn your cameras back on to have a quick conversation about this question and get perspectives. Okay, so we've got a question from Matt. How helpful is a whole school approach which doesn't mention or address violence against men and boys? Any takers, any perspectives from our lovely panelists?
I'm happy to say the work that we do, if that helps. I think I mentioned about not alienating the boys, and that's really hard, because a 14-year-old boy doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, or ever perceives themselves as doing anything wrong. I think it's really important that we do acknowledge that men can experience violence, and can be and I really say that all our work, I want everyone in the room to feel that this can help their own relationships. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, and as far as I'm concerned, we do try as far as we can address that as well. I don't know if anyone else thinks.
I just wanted to add something as well. That I think for us, the philosophy is that when we support and uplift the most marginalized in society, everybody benefits. And we know that the root causes of the forms of violence and abuse that we're talking about are sexism, misogyny, racism, homophobia. So when we address them at the core, young men and boys benefit too. If we address the root causes that we're speaking about today, young men and boys will also benefit, because fundamentally we all want the same thing, and that's we want all young people to be safe in schools. Mm-hmm. And that is fundamentally what the project is aiming to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Zoe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say that one of the really kind of important threads that have come through is about the voices of young people, and how the spaces are created that are safe and inclusive, where they can talk about their experiences and share their stories and share their solutions. Mm-hmm. And finding appropriate ways to do that, I think, is so powerful, and that's where that kind of really positive change happens. Mm-hmm. So we do that in Girl Guiding through our peer education program, where which, yeah, it was really interesting what you were saying, Susie, because it was making me think about our peer education and girls kind of leading those sessions with other younger girls to talk about kind of safety, and just, yeah, the power of having those spaces for young people to talk about their experiences and feel able to be themselves and open up feels, really important.
Thank you. Thank you for your contributions. And we haven't got any further questions. So I will wrap up. I will move on to key takeaways. Thank you so much, panelists. Key takeaways. So we talked about the whole school approach being a jigsaw puzzle, each piece, representing an interconnected activity that brings together everyone within the ecosystem to learn about the building blocks of a healthy relationship in order to change the culture. And I think that's been beautifully illustrated by our speakers today. I love a quote. I love an inspirational quote, and Audre Lorde reminds us, that there is liberation in community. And what we're hearing, is community is fundamental to the successful implementation of a whole school approach to build capacity, to equip everyone with the tools that they need to disrupt and dismantle violence against women and girls at the root. We know that capacity building can increase awareness to challenge those attitudes. We've heard that today in practice. Equally, we've heard today, how one-off activities, delivered without any follow-up have a limited impact. And that's why it's so vitally important that everybody is coming on this journey. It's critical that we, come together as a community to challenge stereotypes and expectations around gender that children and young people might hold. So before I end today's webinar, I invite you to respond to our call to action if you haven't already, and to pledge to become a part of our Healthy London Healthy Relationship Prevention community. We know that preventing violence against women and gender-based violence, is a commitment that exceeds 60 days of activism. So we really do hope that you will come on the journey, and wherever you've come from today, we hope that you feel inspired to be a seed of change within your community. So we've got some up and coming webinars in 2023 around intersectional discrimination, harmful practices, and bystander awareness. So again, if you head over to the hub, signed up, stay in the know for what's going on in 2023. We are coming up to 11:15. The webinar is concluded on that note. Thank you once again for participating, and spread the word. Enjoy the rest of your morning, and thank you for coming along today.